This is Sunday, September 28th, 2014. This is the second and final day of our little weekend non-residential Vimalakirti Days of Awe Sesshin, our second non-residential Sesshin right here at Endless Path, Zendo. We will continue taking a look at the great archetypal layman of Buddhist tradition, Vimalakirti, and we'll begin with taking a look at chapter 2 of the Vimalakirti Sutra, Expedient Means. This is from the Burton Watson translation, which I think is the most accessible, the most Chinese in flavor. There's a very good one by Robert Thurman, which is more Tibetan in flavor, but they're both very, very good. Bob Thurman's has more extensive notes. There are issues. Each translation is like every work of translation, is a work of a kind of inspired response to the original language. Each is a little different. So expedient means, which also means upaya, or skillful means. And it goes like this. This is the entire chapter we'll read. It's rather short for a chapter. At that time, in the great city of Vaisali, there was a rich man named Vimalakirti. Already in the past, he had offered alms to immeasurable numbers of Buddhas, had deeply planted the roots of goodness, and had grasped the truth of birthlessness. Unhindered in his eloquence, able to disport himself with transcendental powers, he commanded full retention of the teachings and had attained the state of fearlessness. He had overcome the torments and ill will of Mara. Watson uses the word devil, but we'll translate it back into a traditional term. And entered deeply into the doctrine of the law. We'll use dharma. Watson uses law. Proficient in the paramita of wisdom, and a master in the employing of expedient means. He had successfully fulfilled his great vow that we take at the end of every formal period of Zazen. He had successfully fulfilled his great vow for the many beings, and could clearly discern how the minds of others were tending. Moreover, he could distinguish whether their capacities were keen or obtuse. His mind was cleansed and purified through long practice of the Buddha way, firm in its grasp of the great vehicle, which is literally Maha, great, Yana, vehicle, the great vehicle. And all his actions were well thought out and planned. He maintained the dignity and authority of a Buddha, and his mind was as vast as the sea. Dalai Lama, I believe, Dalai Lama indicates the same kind of thing, mind like an ocean Lama. His mind was vast as the sea. All the Buddhas sighed with admiration, and he commanded the respect of the disciples of Indra, Brahma, and the four heavenly kings. Desiring to save others, he employed the excellent expedient of residing in Vaisali. His immeasurable riches he had used to relieve the poor. His faultless observation of the precepts served as a reproach to those who would violate prohibitions. Through his restraint and forbearance, he warned others against rage and anger, and his great assiduousness discouraged all thought of sloth and indolence. Concentrating his single mind in quiet meditation, he suppressed, that is, saw through, disordered thoughts. Through firm and unwavering wisdom, he overcame all that was not wise. Watson says that this describes his practice of the 6 paramitas. There originally were 6. Later on in Mahayana, there were 10 paramitas, which I explored in the book Endless Path, which is taking a Jataka tale for each paramita. Though dressed in the white robes of a layman, he observed all the rules of pure conduct laid down for monks, and though he lived at home, he felt no attachment to the threefold world. One could see he had a wife and children, yet he was at all times chaste in action. Obviously, he had kin and household attendants, yet he always delighted in withdrawing. Although he wore jewels and finery, Withdrawing doesn't mean separating himself, but he delighted in having time alone, in aloneness, which could have meant quite in the midst of things as well. Extrapolating here. Although he wore jewels and finery, his real adornment was the auspicious marks of wisdom and compassion. Although he ate and drank like others, what he truly savored was the joy of meditation. If he visited the gambling parlors, it was to bring enlightenment to those there. If he listened to the doctrines of other religions, he did not allow them to impinge on true faith. Though well versed in secular writings, his constant delight was in the Dharma. Respected by everyone, he was looked on as foremost among those deserving of alms. Embracing and upholding the correct Dharma, he gave guidance to old and young. In a spirit of trust and harmony, he conducted all kinds of business enterprises, but though he reaped worldly profits, he was not really caught up in these. It says he took no delight. I think he wasn't caught up. He frequented the busy crossroads in order to bring benefit to others, entered the government office and courts of law so as to aid and rescue all those he could. He visited the places of debate in order to guide others to the great vehicle, that is the Mahayana, visited the schools and study halls to further the instruction of the pupils. He entered houses of ill fame to teach the folly of fleshly desire, entered wine shops in order to encourage those with a will to quit them. If he was among rich men, they honored him as foremost among them because he preached the superior Dharma for them. If he was among lay believers, they honored him as foremost because he freed them from greed and attachment. Among Kshatriyas, that is, warrior class, the Buddha was said to be of that class, he was most highly honored because he taught forbearance. Among Brahmins, he was most highly honored because he rid them of their self-conceit. The great ministers honored him as foremost because he taught the correct Dharma. The princes honored him as foremost because he showed them how to be loyal and filial. Within the women's quarters, he was most honored because he converted and brought refinement to the women of the harem. The common people honored him as first among them because he helped them to gain wealth and power. The Brahma deities honored him as first among them because he revealed the superiority of wisdom. The Indras, that is, kings of the gods, honored him as first among them because he demonstrated the truth of impermanence. The four heavenly kings, guardians of the world, honored him as foremost because he guarded all living beings. In this way, the rich man Vimalakirti employed immeasurable numbers of expedient means in order to bring benefit to others. Using these expedient means, he made it appear that his body had fallen prey to illness. Because of his illness, the king of the country, the great ministers, rich men, lay believers, and Brahmins, as well as the princes and lesser officials numbering countless thousands, all went to see him and inquire about his illness. Vimalakirti then used this bodily illness to expound the Dharma to them in broad terms. Good people, this body is impermanent, without durability, without strength, without firmness, a thing that decays in a moment, not to be relied on. It suffers, it is tormented, a meeting place of manifold ills. Good people, no person of enlightened wisdom could depend on a thing like this body. This body is like a cluster of foam, nothing you can grasp or handle. This body is like a bubble that cannot continue for long. This body is like a flame, born of longing and desire. This body is like the plantain that has no firmness in its trunk. This body is like a phantom, the product of error and confusion. This body is like a dream, compounded of false and empty visions. This body is like a shadow, appearing through karmic causes. This body is like an echo, tied to causes and conditions. This body is like a drifting cloud, changing and vanishing in an instant. This body is like lightning, barely lasting from moment to moment. This body is like earth that has no subjective being. This body is like fire, devoid of ego. This body is like wind that has no set lifespan. This body is like water, devoid of individuality. This body has no reality that makes these four elements its lodging. This body is void, removed from self and self's possessions. This body is without understanding, like plants or trees, tiles or pebbles. This body is without positive action, blown about by the wind. This body is impure, crammed with defilement and evil. This body is empty and unreal. Though for a time you may bathe and cleanse, clothe and feed it, in the end it must crumble and fade. This body is plague-ridden, beset by 101 ills and anxieties. This body is like the abandoned well on the hillside, old age pressing in on it. This body has no fixity, but is destined for certain death. This body is like poisonous snakes, vengeful bandits, or an empty village, a mere coming together of components, realms, and sense fields, good people. A thing like this is irksome, and therefore you should seek the Buddha body. Why? Because the Buddha body is the Dharma body. It is born from immeasurable merits and wisdom. It is born from precepts, meditation, wisdom, emancipation, and the insight of emancipation. It is born from pity, compassion, joy, and equanimity. It is born of the various paramitas, such as almsgiving, keeping of the precepts, forbearance, and gentleness, assiduousness in religious practice, meditation, emancipation, and samadhi, wide knowledge and wisdom. It is born of expedient means, born of the 6 transcendental powers, born of the 3 understandings, born of the 37 elements of the way, born of concentration and insight, born of the 10 powers, the 4 kinds of fearlessness, and the 18 unshared properties of a Buddha. It is born of the cutting off of all things not good, and the gathering in of all good things, born of the truth, born of the avoidance of indulgence and laxity. The body of the thus come one is born of immeasurable numbers of pure and spotless things, such as these. Good people, if you wish to gain the Buddha body and do away with the ills that afflict all living beings, then you must set your minds on attaining Anuttara, Samyak, Sambodhi. That is absolutely pure and perfect realization, true enlightenment. In this manner, the rich man Vimalakirti used the occasion of his illness to preach the Dharma to those who had come to inquire about his illness. As a result, numberless thousands of persons were all moved to set their mind on attaining Anuttara, Samyak, Sambodhi. Okay, we get it. The sutra paints a clear picture. Vimalakirti is a very fully functioning, realized layman. His practice realization is totally engaged with every aspect of life as well as with the most profound realities of Dharma teaching. By the way, for India, around 200 Common Era, or AD, this whole section of the Vimalakirti Sutra would be considered quite concise. Indian sutras can be very flowery and repetitive. When the great translator, the Central Asian monk Kumarajiva, created the Chinese version of the Vimalakirti Sutra around the year 400, he tightened it up. But the Zen view, about 300 years after the great mythic Vimalakirti was said to have lived, 100 or so years after Kumarajiva, goes far beyond even that pared-down Chinese form of Indian Sanskrit Buddhist vision. Starting with Bodhidharma, it cut right to the chase. Direct pointing. Here's a presentation from the Hekigan Roku Blue Cliff Record, a koan collection from around the year 1100. to it, which along with the Wumen-kon, or Mumonkan from a bit later, remains one of the two most central koan collections Zen students work on today. This is case 82, Hekiganoku, Dalung, that is in Japanese Daryu, and the indestructible Dharma body. A monk said to Dalung, "The physical body ultimately decomposes. What is the indestructible Dharma body?" Dalung said, "The mountain flowers cover the hillside like brocade. The valley streams are blue as indigo." Dalung's point, at least philosophically, is very much like Vimalakirti's profound Dharma view, but it is much more immediate, direct, simple, and poetic. But it is not poetry, and it is not philosophy. It is a direct answer, as direct and non-philosophical as Vimalakirti's own vigorously thundering silence, which we looked at yesterday. And it does answer it, answers the age-old anxiety we all carry, skewering Vimalakirti's more roundabout Indian approach, even as Vimalakirti skewered Manjushri's profound response on non-duality. And non-duality is the point. Always the point of Zen practice, especially of koan practice. It is never a matter of simply gaining conceptual pointers for future practice. All concepts must be seen through, done away with, abandoned, even good ones, even the best and loftiest ones. As the Zen saying goes, even gold dust in the eyes will blind us. Better is nothing at all. But let's not get confused. What is this nothing we hear so much about? Is it a pernicious, mayonnaise, undifferentiated sort of emptiness? A jury sort of void, blah, mushy nothing? No, absolutely not. Nor is it some vast, dark void shot through with meteoric glimmers of light. Vast emptiness. Nothing to be called holy is what Bodhidharma answered when asked by Emperor Wu of China, what is the highest holy teaching of the Buddha? How does this relate to our actual life? To shopping for groceries, having tea with a friend, stubbing our toe in the dark, going to sleep, eating a meal? If you can't answer in a truly ordinary way, then you are missing something vital. If you don't get what Bodhidharma means, you'll go abysmally astray. In a sense, our practice comes down again and again to realizing that is making real this very point. What is vast emptiness? Nothing holy. And why is it so great? It sounds awful. Why bother to awake to it if that's it? If it's nothing, why go through all the time-consuming, frustrating, demanding work of Zen practice and training if that's all it gets you? Why, indeed? In part, we do it because we know the monk's problem and his anguish all too well. This physical body, born of a specific mother and father, is short-lived, as Vimalakirti says. It will die and rot. This is the realist reality, the one we try to hold at arm's length for as long as possible. So out of deep concern about impermanence, his own impermanence, the monk asks, what is the eternal body? The one that Zen practice is supposed to get me. That's why I practice, to be free of this fear of aging and death. Can you show me what this Dharma body beyond impermanence looks like? In short, in Zen parlance, he's asking, what is my original face, the one that's been mine since before my parents were even born? What is the Dharmakaya, the absolute sacred ground of reality? The great Hakuin, driven by a childhood terror of dying and of then falling into hellish realms after death, practiced mightily night and day to resolve this awful terror. If Buddhism offers freedom from death and suffering, he concluded, then he would be determined, and he was determined, to practice for all he was worth until he'd gained its promised freedom. From the very beginning is what he came up with. In his Zazen Wasan, he states it so simply. From the very beginning, all beings are Buddha. And he concludes, this very body, the body of Buddha. So what happened that he could so graciously express it like this after being so terrified for so long? Dharmakaya is the most profound of the Buddha's so-called three bodies or three levels of reality. Nirmanakaya is the infinitely unique reality of this flower, this speck of dust, this smiling face, this frowning face, this sleeping cat, this half-used pencil, never repeatable, never in the history of the entire universe to be seen again. When Van Gogh painted a magnificent picture of a pair of old, worn-out, beaten-up boots, he was seeing and allowing us to see Nirmanakaya. Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha with a particular life of birth and death, is the Nirmanakaya body. Sambhogakaya is the body of interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh has aptly named it, where each being, each speck of dust, enjoys its interconnection with the entire living universe. Nothing stands alone. Non-historic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas find great delight disporting in and embodying this realm of visionary awareness, dreams, thoughts, and insights. Finally, Dharmakaya is the profound, bottomless, ungraspable ground of it all, the so-called Dharma body, the absolute level of consciousness, the reality of mind itself. The Kanzeon, Kannon Sutra of Timeless Life, describes this level of reality, for Buddha is our own mind, as eternal, joyous, selfless, pure. The monk was caught by that. Eternal, eh? Eternal and indestructible man, he thought, that sounds good. I'm seeing wrinkles and liver spots on my body. I have friends who have died. I've seen dead animals rotting by the wayside. Where is the indestructible Dharma body? That's why I'm practicing, willing to put up with all that these crazy Zen teachers demand. Now, please show me, or give me that thing that lasts, that remains beyond all these never-ending horrible changes. Dalung, who was a Zen master and also a poet, said, "The mountain flowers cover the hillside like brocade. The valley streams are blue as indigo." A wonderful answer. But what makes it wonderful? Is it the lovely poetry, or is it something else? That's the question. How does it not only help the monk and us, but actually reveals eternal truth? Guan Wu, we know him in Japanese sometimes as Engo, along with Shuedo, we know in Japanese as Secho. The actual compiler, Shuedo was, together they created the finished Hekigonroku, Blue Glyph record, with its collection of koan cases, pointers, commentaries, and poetry. So Guan Wu comments on the case that I just read to you by saying this. If you go to the words to search for this thing, it's like trying to hit the moon by waving a stick. You won't make any connection. An ancient clearly stated, if you want to attain intimacy, don't ask with questions. Why? Because the question is in the answer, and the answer is in the question. This monk picked up a load of crudeness and exchanged it for a load of confusion. Imposing this question, his defeat was not slight. How could anyone other than Dalung manage to cover heaven and cover earth? The monk asking this way and Dalung answering this way is a single whole. Dalung didn't move a hair's breadth. It was like seeing a rabbit and releasing a falcon, like seeing a hole and putting in a plug. Is this time and season in the 12-part canon of the triple vehicle? An important point. Is this time and season in the 12-part canon of the triple vehicle? That is, in all the wonderful written texts, will you find that moment? Undeniably, his answer, that is our own moment. Undeniably, his answer was extraordinary. It's just that his words have no flavor and he blocks up people's mouths. Thus it is said, when white clouds lie across the valley mouth, many birds returning by night can't find their nests. Some say that this was just answering glibly. Those who understand in this fashion are nothing but exterminators of the Buddha's race. They are far from knowing that with one device and one objective, the ancients broke fetters and smashed chains, that every word and phrase were pure gold and raw gems. If one has the eye and brain of a patched rope monk, sometimes he holds fast and sometimes he lets go, shining and functioning at the same time with both persons and objects taken away. Both sides let go and both sides gather in. Facing the situation, he changes accordingly. Without the great function and great capacity, how would he be able to enclose heaven and earth like this? Much as a bright mirror. When a foreigner comes, a foreigner appears. And when a native comes, a native appears. This case is the same as the story of case 39 of the flower hedge. Another very beautiful and interesting little koan. Though the meaning is not the same, here the monk's question was ignorant, so Dao Lung's answer was exactly appropriate. Haven't you heard? A monk asked Yun Men, how is it when the tree withers and the leaves fall? That's another case. Yun Men said, the body exposed in the golden wind. This is called arrow points meeting. Here the monk asked Dao Lung, the physical body rots away. What is the hard and fast body of reality? Dao Lung said, the mountain flowers bloom like brocade. The valley streams are brimming blue as indigo. Since he acts this way, I don't act this way. Matching Dao Lung's answer with Yun Men's, they're opposites. It's easy to see Yun Men acting thus, but it's hard to see Dao Lung acting otherwise. Nevertheless, Dao Lung's tongue is very subtle. In other words, he wasn't just being contrary to throw the monk off his game and open a new vista through surprise. That is, he wasn't taking a reverse position, as in, oh, he asked for the eternal, so I'll give him the passing and ephemeral. No. Very subtle. Also means so very direct that it comes in under the radar of our alert, wanting to be given an answer attention. It's so ordinary we miss what is right in front of us. What is right in front of us? The carpet is speckled brown. The teisho stand made of pale yellowish wood is fragile. Yes. But how does that free us of our anxiety about the impermanence of this very aging body? There is a way. It is 1, 2, 3, and on to 10. Don't worry about getting to 10 or answering the question. Just be each number fully. Just be this one breath, this one koan point. And then what? 1, 2, 3. This breath. This koan point. Some might be tempted to say that, after all, Zen is maddening, too clever by half, and unnecessarily obfuscating for no good reason, that it's a tricky spiritual mind game of one-upsmanship. But as Vimalakirti might say if he ever heard such a crude response, stop right there, don't slander the Dharma. Indeed, Dalung is not joking. He is not being clever. He is being completely open, sincere, heartfelt, direct. But he is not pondering. He is responding, perfectly fitting the punishment to the crime. The good news is also that simply by answering he shows that there is an answer, as Vimalakirti himself did with his vast, roaring silence, and that this answer can help us, like Dalung himself, live our own lives at least a bit freer of the underlying corrosive anxiety that at some point comes to us all, being conscious and knowing that we must age and die. How can this be? What is this truth? How can we recognize it in our own busy, complex lives? This is what also grabbed the Prince Siddhartha Gautama by the throat 2,600 years ago in India. He, like this monk, like us, was deeply troubled by his realization of the reality, the inescapable reality of birth, old age, sickness, and death, which is why he left home, to find a truth that transcended this, our given reality of impermanence, an existential nausea, willing to die, if need be, in the attempt. Like Dalung, like this monk, he too wasn't joking. His own answer to his terror was to realize deep, deep enlightenment and to embody in life the Eightfold Path and the paramitas and the precepts, all as expressions of that realization, not as substitutes for it. Non-awakening oriented Zen or just sitting practice can fall into a trap here, substituting effects like calmness and mindfulness for causes. Rather than aiming for the core, the bullseye of the target, they stick with the consequences that flow from an actual center of the target shot. The monk did not make that mistake. He asks for ultimate truth, realizing that only real truth, the deepest truth, not palliatives, can solve his personal existential crisis. Let's give him some respect. He accepts that there is a truth that answers our anxiety and that through practice it can be realized. Job in the Bible felt the same. No partial view could satisfy or free him from the ills he knew too well of loss and change, of unfair events, even egregious injustice. Only the Dharmakaya, only the voice of God from deep out of the whirlwind could put his mind and heart at rest, and not stifle or assuage or simply calm his anxiety, but free him from it. Realizing we're all under a life sentence, how do we actually grasp that our life sentence is our life? There is nothing outside the way, even our anxiety, even our terror, even our disappointments, losses, and challenges, all are grist for the great turning of the Dharma wheel, the great turning of our lives towards peace and truth. Elsewhere in the Vimalakirti Sutra, Vimalakirti, from his sick bed as a teaching device, asked Manjushri, Bodhisattva of wisdom, what are the seeds of our attaining Buddhahood? Or what makes enlightenment possible? Manjushri answered, if you do not descend into the vast ocean, you can never acquire a priceless pearl. In the same way, if you do not enter the great sea of earthly desires, you can never acquire the treasure of comprehensive wisdom. In short, Manjushri is saying that this life, with all its problems and difficulties, with aging and ill health, is itself the very ground of our attaining and practicing wisdom and liberation. finding some eternally static place is not Zen's answer. Being stuck in emptiness is not the point. The Vimalakirti Sutra again and again takes the Buddha's own great disciples to task, saying that having realized emptiness vast and serene, they are stuck, thinking they have something, they do not know how to go on, how to continue on the endless path of bodhisattva vows and deeper awakened practice. Again and again, Zen teaching itself challenges all who cling to such limited views, saying you must go beyond that. Take a step from the top of that 100-foot pole of Zen practice that you, with so much effort and dedication, even desperation, have spent all those years climbing up, and now let it go completely. Let go what you've gained and where you've comfortably settled. Transcend even this. Then you will really begin to function. Then, says Wu Men, quoting an eminent master of ancient times in case number 46 of the Gateless Barrier, or Muman Kwan or Wu Men Kwan, the world of the 10 directions will be your own complete body. Here's the poem he quotes. You who sit on the top of a 100-foot pole, although you have entered the way, it is not yet genuine. Take a step from the top of the pole, and the worlds of the 10 directions are your total body. It must be genuine. Our practice must function in life, not just in the silence of the Zendo or Doksan room. This is why the great bodhisattva from the land of Akshobhya Buddha, known in this world as Vimalakirti or spotless reputation, appears in the form of a very busy, actively engaged layman. It is why he appears on a sickbed. He is showing us that realized practice occurs right in the midst of the very life we live now. He is not saying, get thee to a monastery, shave your head and go on staff at a residential training Zen center. Instead, he is saying, wake up now, no excuses. And what does this mean? Simply that we must do the work where we are, walking, sitting, standing, lying down, eating, playing, shopping, reading, watching movies. And what is this work? To be aware, to grasp who and what we are, to walk and not know we walk, and yet not to be ignorant of our walking. Let us continue on, then, just as we are, and find out for ourselves what Vimalakirti and Dalung and Wu Men too meant when they spoke skillful words in response to our human anguish, our narcissism and error. Dalung's immediate, unpremeditated response to that questioning monk was so good that it has stood the test of time for over 1,000 years. It has gone on, too, to help liberate others from that same anguish as well. Because of those words and their resonance, we're sitting here now, practicing in this little Zendo today. The beloved Japanese Zen monk and poet Ryokan, his years are 1758 to 1832, addressed this point in a number of his brief, charming, and profound verses. I've always loved Ryokan. All the great stories of his life and his wonderful writings. He lived a free, humble, creative, and somewhat isolated life in small hermitages among farmers and ordinary people. While he had a small hut or hermitage and was fairly isolated, he also loved playing ball and hide and seek with the local children. He loved, too, munching mochi, toasted rice cakes, and drinking sake with the local farmers. He held their work of farmers, which nourishes us all in deep respect. Coming upon farmers toiling in the fields, he would simply bow down in respect and reverence. Over time, he became quite famous for his calligraphy and his poetry, both of which are now prized as national treasures in Japan. There was nothing false about him. He was sincere and genuine through and through. If you should ever doubt Zen as a meaningful, deeply human path, I hope you will take the time to become acquainted with Ryokan and immerse yourself in his writings, absorb them, and be absorbed by them. Perhaps his most famous verse, a haiku, goes like this. The thief left it behind, the moon at the window. This too could have been a wonderful response to the troubled monk who came to Dalung. In light of this, there's an interesting story about Ryokan. A woman relative asked him to come to her place. Her son, his cousin, a young man in his early 20s, had taken a bad turn in life and spent much of his time and the family money drinking, gambling, and frequenting the geisha houses. This relative begged Ryokan to come and help, to lecture the young reprobate and get him to change his ways. Dutifully, Ryokan came. He stayed for several days, but surprisingly, never brought any of this up, never said a word about it. That silence must have been maddening for the relative who'd invited him. Then as he was leaving, was on the veranda bending down to tie on his straw sandals, he called for his nephew. Or cousin, whatever it was. When the young man came, he said, "I'm getting too old and frail to bend and properly tie on my sandals. Would you please help me?" The young man knelt down and, as he was tying on the sandals, he felt something warm splash onto his hand. He looked up. Ryokan was looking down at him. Tears were falling from his eyes. It was a tear that had struck the young man's hand. Without saying a word, Ryokan then tied on his monk's hat, took a staff in his hand, and left. It said that the young man's behavior changed dramatically for the good from that day on. Vimalakirti's thundering silence has many voices. It is not nothing at all. Never think that, please. Emptiness itself is not nothing at all. Far from it. That is where the Buddha's own eminent disciples got stuck, as you'll see in the Vimalakirti Sutra. Settling down in emptiness, satisfied with what they'd seen, they had yet to develop the mind of the Bodhisattva that both recognizes vast emptiness and still seeks the endlessly skillful means to liberate all suffering beings. Simply put, they were stuck at the top of the pole and had become incapable of coming down and shedding tears with the rest of us. Once, more than 1,000 years ago, for 1,000 years ago is simply when Shuido put it in his book, the dialogue occurred hundreds of years earlier. A monk came to Dalung, who, like Manjushri and like Vimalakirti, both equally great bodhisattvas, clearly had that mind, the mind of the Great Way, the Mahayana. And the troubled monk asked, "The physical body ultimately decomposes. What is the indestructible Dharma body?" Dalung didn't hold back. It's as if someone had given Vimalakirti a little poke and said, please, come on, just at least say something. So Dalung opened up and said it all, exposing his gallbladder, liver, and heart in what's called clam Zen, that is Zen that shows everything, hides nothing, and like an opened clamshell leaves all the soft guts exposed. The mountain flowers cover the hillside like brocade. The valley streams are blue as indigo. He didn't stint. Done deal. Teisho finished. Right, there it is. Now it's simply up to us to understand, live it, and at last, like one cured of a long-standing illness, released from our ancient anxiety, find ways to put it to good use.